Thank you, Teresa. Well, good morning. Thank you all for coming to hear about Gilded Age things. In my talk at the Gilded Age Symposium and the subsequent article on Marietta Holley, I explored in a preliminary way three topics: her comic pedigree, her comic tactics, and her politics, using her first book, My Opinions and Betsey Bobbet'S, published in 1873, as a case study. The last topic is important because Holley has been celebrated for her advocacy of women's rights. My article suggests that Samantha consistently calling herself Josiah Allen's wife hints at some contradictions in her feminist agenda. Samantha repeats her political position at various moments in the narrative. Mediumness, her dialect pronunciation of mediumness, that is a middle-of-the-road stance. What I tried to show in the article was that Holley's use of historical events in her fiction had a certain selective bias. In the context of the suffragettes movement of 1873, Holley's presentation of Samantha meeting some of the most important figures of the movement, Susan Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Elizabeth Beecher Hooker, Thomas Tilton, and Victoria Woodhull, effectively ignores the split in the movement that had begun in 1870 between the conservative Boston-based American Women's Suffrage Association, under the leadership of Lucy Stone and Beecher, and the more radical National Women's Suffrage Association under Anthony and Tilton. Moreover, the debate on marriage and divorce, and by implication the doctrine of free love, that Holley stages between Samantha and Victoria Woodhull reveals her alter ego as rigidly against divorce as any conservative male politician might be, using religious references to make her points. The strict religious context Holley gives marriage blindly supports one of the pillars of the cult of true womanhood, piety, even though the scholarly consensus has Holley, quote, showing the principles of true womanhood to be unrealistic, debilitating, and false. The possibility of divorce was a wedge issue for the suffragist movement, with Woodhull as the most radical of all the women's rights leaders, on record as supporting not only divorce, Stanton had also advocated for it as far back as 1860, but also free love. That Holley opposed divorce only puts her on the other side of the debate. It is the religious context that surprises and puts in doubt Samantha's claim to be middle of the road. There's also a question of how Holley used or ignored actual events in her first book, the details of which are not important here. You could go read my article, perhaps. Though a partisan on the important issue of divorce, Holley's support for equal rights in general cannot be doubted. Today, I want to jump from 1873 to late in Holley's career for another milestone in her advocacy of suffrage. 40 years after her first book, in 1913, she publishes a second book that comically argues for women's suffrage, Samantha on the Woman Question. The second book suggests Holley's tireless advocacy of women's rights after all the decades in which the movement struggled to gain traction. Her first book should be centered in the Gilded Age, but the second takes place in the Progressive era, when the campaign for the franchise was gaining the momentum that will result in the 19th Amendment in 1920. Such was her concern to rally her reading public to the cause that she published the following year yet a third book on the topic, Josiah Allen on the Woman Question. I want to briefly rehearse some of the events a few years before the appearance of both books to suggest why Holley renews in print her satiric support for suffrage. Early in the 20th century, she was once again demonstrating that she was not only paying attention to the politics of the day, but was also willing to embed Samantha and her foolishly patriarchal husband Josiah into them. Holley publishes Samantha on the Woman Question because by then the women's suffrage movement in 1913 had become truly national, with an impact on federal politics. In 1912, 3 more states, Arizona, Kansas, and Oregon, had passed referenda giving women the vote, joining 6 others. Now there were 9 states with women voting, and it meant that national political parties were taking notice. After a period the suffragists called the doldrums, from 1896, when the last states, Utah and Idaho, had granted the franchise, events in 1909 and 1910 signaled the beginning of a final push toward national suffrage, with the addition of 3 new states in 1912, a watershed moment. Holley publishes Josiah Allen on the women question in 1914 because the National Women's Suffrage Association, revitalized in New York by Harriet Stanton Blatch, the daughter of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Anna Howard Shaw, the current president of the organization, had authorized another leader in the movement, Alice Paul, to organize a protest rally and parade in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day, March 3, 1913. The parade dramatized the strategy of shifting from a state-by-state approach to a campaign for a federal amendment. Woodrow Wilson's inauguration provided the occasion to launch a sustained media blitz that not only included other parades, but also a weeks-long picketing of the White House. These events prompted Josiah to write his book against Samantha and what he calls, quote, her almost blasphemous doctrine that, women are equal to men. For as he says, again quoting, things are growing worse and worse all the time. Female women are rising up on every side, claiming to be equal to men, talking, preaching, hiking, parading with lion banners. Holley was paying attention to the upsurge in the movement that had begun in the fall of 1909 when Christabel Pankhurst, the radical English feminist, gave a talk in Carnegie Hall at the invitation of Blatch. People were turned away, so popular was the event. A few months later, in January 1910, Alice Paul returns to the United States as a minor celebrity for her efforts in England with Pankhurst, which had included significant jail time and a hunger strike. Paul would become the driving force behind the movement's shift to a federal amendment. Holley wanted to lend her comic talents to the new push and no doubt didn't mind the prospect of making some money too. The publisher for both books, the Fleming Revell Company, boasted on the title pages that they printed books not only in New York and Chicago, but also Toronto, London, and Edinburgh. Holley, in the second decade of the 20th century, remained a formidable presence in a certain niche of the literary market. The opening chapter of Samantha on the Woman Question is a litany of misery caused to one family, not only due to laws that gave women no legal standing in either financial affairs or custody of children, but mostly because of abusive drinking. This emphasis on alcohol is a clear reference to the events of 1912, when 3 of the 6 state referenda on suffrage were defeated, 2 of them, Ohio and Wisconsin, directly due to the opposition of organized distillers and brewers who claimed that giving women the vote would result in prohibition. The argument was particularly potent in Ohio, the birthplace of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Temperance advocates had long overlapped with the suffrage movement, and from the WCTU's point of view, endorsing suffrage could be a way to enact constraints on drinking and so protect women from the abuses of male alcoholism. It is something of an irony that the 18th Amendment inaugurating prohibition was passed in 1919, 1 year before the 19th Amendment. No one could blame women. But I bet they did. It must have been more than a little gratifying to Holley that she lived long enough to see the 19th Amendment passed and to vote in the election of 1920. Marietta Holley had one of the longest-running careers, writing mostly comic material, publishing 25 books, including a collection of short stories and poems, 2 dramas, and 1 long poem, between 1873 and 1914. The audiences who read her Samantha books laughed as Holley exemplified the tradition of vernacular humorists featuring dialect speech and a mother-wit, cracker-barrel characters. In the 21st century, we can celebrate her commitment to a more perfect union in the United States. Thanks for listening.